Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing about the next part of the chapter The Invention of Vita Wonk. In the previous part we we read about how Mr. Willy Wonka invented a potion which makes people younger, but the potion have some mistakes in it. So to correct those mistakes he then think about making a new potion which will help people to make them older. For this, he went to a world tour where he tried to find different older things, and collected some some part of those things to make his potion. Now, let's start with the next part of this chapter. All over the world, Charlie, Mr. Wonka went on. I tracked down very old and ancient animals and took an important little bit of something from each one of them. A hair or an eyebrow, or sometimes it was no more than an ounce or two of the jam scraped from between its toes while it was sleeping. So Mr. Wonka told Charlie that he tracked down very old and ancient animals and tried to take some important little bit of something from each one of them. He then continued, I tracked down the whistle pig, the bobolink, the scrock, the polyfrog, the giant curlicue, the stinging slug, and the venomous squircle, who can spit poison right into your eye from 50 yards away. But there's no time to tell you about them all now, Charlie. Here few things are mentioned from which Mr. Wonka collected something, a little bit of something from each animal. As Mr. Willy Wonka collected so many things, he told Charlie that he can't just tell everything to him, he has no time for that. Let me just say quickly that in the end, after lots of boiling and bubbling and mixing and testing in my inventing room, I produced one tiny cupful of oily black liquid and gave 4 drops of it to a brave 20-year-old Oompa Loompa volunteer to see what happened. So what did Mr. Wonka did? He started collecting all the ingredients and took all those ingredients to his lab and started processes like boiling, bubbling, and mixing, and then testing it in the inventing room. He produced a tiny cupful of oily black liquid and then gave only 4 drops of it to a 20-year-old Oompa Loompa volunteer. So, volunteers are those people who are willingly trying to help you without thinking about getting something in return. What did happen? Charlie asked. It was fantastic, cried Mr. Wonka. So here you can see that Charlie was curious about the liquid that Mr. Wonka gave to that Oompa Loompa volunteer. And Mr. Wonka happily said that it was fantastic. The moment he swallowed it, he began wrinkling and shriveling up all over, and his hair started dropping off, and his teeth started falling out, and before I knew it, he had suddenly become an old fellow of 75, and thus, my dear Charlie, was Vita Wonk invented. So, this is an interesting conversation between Charlie and Mr. Wonka. When Charlie asked about what happened to that liquid, Mr. Wonka told him that the moment the volunteer swallowed it, he began wrinkling all over the body. His face, his hands, his toes, everything became wrinkled. And he started shriveling, his hair started falling off, and he turned into a 75-year-old fella. And then Mr. Wonka said, "It's how Vita Wonk was invented by him." He was so happy that Vita Wonk can be made possible by all the processes he had done and all the things he collected from all over the world. And through this, you get to know that how the idea of Wonka Vite helped in inventing Vita Wonk. This story was written by Roald Dahl, and it's a small snippet from a novel, and its name is Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. You have heard about a great glass elevator in this text only, so you can then read about Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. So that's how Vita Wonk is invented, and I hope you enjoyed this story. This story was full of different kind of names, imaginary places, imaginary people, and you also get to know how Wonka White turned into Vita Wonk. So I hope you have enjoyed this story. Goodbye everyone, and let's meet in next video.